Chapter 35. The Battle Ends. With the Master Sword in one hand, and Prince Fasad's magical shield in the other, Link stood ready to do battle with the now fully healed Ganondorf. Even the Sorcerer's weapon had been restored, and recalling how difficult it had been to defeat him with the assistance of Fasad and Aghanim, the young man was a little more than nervous. The protection provided by the blue ring made him feel a little better, although it hadn't seemed to help the prince when he was having a trident shoved through his shoulder. "You think that you're on the edge of victory?" Ganondorf asked, looking at him with a snort. "I may have lost both Zelda and the Triforce of Wisdom, but I'll hunt them down once you're dead. Then, I'll have Fasad torn apart by Lynels. I'll have Aghanim executed by the Wizrobes, and as for Miranda, she and Zelda will watch as I kill the King of Hyrule and take the throne, and then spend the rest of their lives as my concubines." "Ganondorf, I just have to ask," Link replied. "What is wrong with you? Look around. You're hiding out inside of an old fortress, kidnapping princesses, and trying to steal the crown like some kind of storybook villain. You've had your minions kill dozens of people all over the southern outskirts, the caretakers at Eagle Prison, the thieves at Lion Fortress, and not to mention the way you've been treating the princess. Doesn't any of that seem wrong to you?" The sorcerer was silent for a moment, and then he chuckled before vanishing, and Link dove out of the way just in time to avoid being stabbed by the trident when he reappeared behind him. Rolling to a squatting position, the young man swung his blade, but Ganondorf vanished again, reappearing off to the side with a stab that Link just barely had time to move his shield in front of. The second attack took him by surprise, and although the shield protected him, the young man was knocked off balance so that he fell to the floor. The sorcerer vanished again, and this time Link swung his sword wildly, making Ganondorf grunt with surprise as the blade struck his leg just as he was reappearing. "Ugh, damn it!" he cried, stumbling back. "You'll pay for that." "What's wrong, Gargamel?" the young man asked as he got up. "Fasad and I already beat you once, and apparently Aghanim beat you by himself. So what is it? Not so powerful without the Triforce to back you." Ganondorf narrowed his eyebrows and gritted his teeth, letting out an angry growl as he raised his trident in the air. Now spinning around, Link wasn't sure what he was doing, but quickly got the idea as a dozen large bats appeared within the circle that seemed to be made of fire? Bats made of fire? There was no more time to think as the first bat flew at him, exploding in a burst of flame when it collided with his shield, making him stagger backwards. Then the second bat came, followed by the third and fourth, each one knocking him back until he fell on one knee. The bats kept coming, the blast from the next one making him drop his shield, but he was able to hit the next one with his sword. Expecting it to explode in his face, the fire bat was instead thrown backwards where it collided with the next one, resulting in the same explosion as before. However, the young man was so caught up in surprise that when the bat after that came shooting through the fire, there was no time to react. It flew right past his sword and crashed into his chest, making Link cry out as the explosion knocked him onto his back. The Master Sword fell from his grip, and once the room stopped spinning, Link rolled over and reached for it, only to grunt with pain as Ganondorf vanished and reappeared while stomping his foot down on his arm. His arm was pinned, so he was about to try reaching for the sword with the other, but stopped when he felt the head of the trident come to rest against his cheek. "How was that for power, you little whelp?" the sorcerer asked, pressing down on his arm a little. "Darknut and I were robbing and murdering far better men than you long before you were born. I have been the scourge of lands that you have never even heard of. I have trained in magics that would leave Aghanim's head spinning. And to set the record straight, it was the Triforce of Power that needed me. I discovered it in the mine. I gathered the monsters that now attack this land, and it will be I that becomes King of Hyrule. Think about that as you die." Link shut his eyes as Ganondorf raised up the trident to stab him, but then there was a strange sound like metal wrapping around metal, and the stab never came. Opening his eyes and looking up, the young man saw that the sorcerer's arms were above his head, but now there was some kind of chain wrapped around the trident. Suddenly there was a pulsing sound as Ganondorf was pulled backwards, and when he moved, it allowed Link to see that the chain had come from Miranda's hookshot. "No one lays a hand on my cousin!" she yelled, trying to keep pulling him. "No one!" Ganondorf glared at her before jamming the trident into the floor so it was stuck, and then he grabbed the chain and started pulling. Without the Bracelet of Power, there was no way for her to overpower him, so the angry look on her face was quickly replaced with fear as she moved towards him. Miranda's feet slid across the floor as she pulled back with all her might, but then the struggle ended as Link, his arm no longer pinned, picked up the Master Sword and rammed it through the sorcerer's back. The young man pulled the sword back out as roughly as he could, causing a spurt of blood as Ganondorf let go of the chain. And then the sorcerer stumbled away, moving across the room until he collapsed to his knees in front of the Triforce's pedestal. He made an attempt to get back up, but just coughed up more blood before sinking back down. "It is decided," the Triforce of Power said as Ganondorf gasped and choked. "I have made a great error in judgment, and I shall return with you, Link." It was hard to describe the level of excitement that Link felt as the Red Pyramid spoke these words. It meant that he had won. All of them had. Princess Zelda was safe, everyone was alive, and now the Triforce of Power was theirs. This whole quest had been long and difficult, but now it was all over, and as he sheathed the Master Sword, he knew that everyone could go home. "No!" Ganondorf yelled, coughing up more blood as magical energy began crackling around him. "You may have bested me with weapons, but you forget that I am the greatest sorcerer in the world and I am not finished yet. If I can't have Zelda and Hyrule, then neither will you. I'll use my dark magics and draw us both into the world of darkness from which we will never return." The sorcerer then screamed, and the magics around him intensified, shaking the room to the point of cracks forming in the walls. Now the energy was swirling around him, creating a noise as if it were a tornado, and the young man could see Miranda waving for him to follow her out, but he needed to get the Triforce, so he ran past Ganondorf and picked up the Red Pyramid as the magical tornado swirled faster, and he was about halfway across the room when the sorcerer disappeared. Ganondorf screamed as he was pulled into what looked like nowhere, and then the sound got even louder before Link was pulled backwards. He fell down and rolled backward toward the swirling vortex, holding tightly to the Triforce with one arm while reaching out for anything that he could find with the other. What he found was the trident that Ganondorf had stuck into the floor, and for a moment it stopped his descent, only to be pulled out of the floor a second later. Thankfully, it was still connected to Miranda's hookshot because Link barely had time to slide his hand over to the chain before it unraveled, and the trident followed its master into the vortex. Up at the other end of the hookshot, Miranda seemed to have escaped beyond the vortex's pull, but the young man was worried that she would not be able to hold him for long as everything in the immediate area, including Facade's shield, was sucked in. But then he barely heard the pulse of her bracelet, and suddenly she pulled him forward, as if he weighed nothing. He and the chain flew toward her until they were out of the vortex's pull. This was good because it allowed them to escape, but also bad because Link crashed into the floor really hard, as did Miranda when she fell on her back a short distance away. As if reacting to them being gone, the vortex suddenly closed a few seconds later, and the room fell silent. It took a bit of time for the shock of what he had just escaped from to wear off, and the first thing he wanted to do was shout in victory, which he might have done if not for the pain of landing on top of the Triforce of Power. Miranda was there to help him up, though, and he still managed to carry the Red Pyramid out while leaning on her. It felt like a really long walk to get out of the still silent Spectacle Rock, where the others were waiting, and of course Miranda dropped him in order to run back to Aghanim. "Don't worry, I'm fine," Link said, leaning against the door as Miranda jumped into the robed wizard's arm. "Yes, we're all fine now." "Link, you did it!" Prince Facade exclaimed as he came over, his arm protectively around Zelda. "I can't believe it. You're a hero. No, you're the hero of all Hyrule. You'll be a legend for this, you know." "You all will," Princess Zelda replied, leaning heavily on Facade. "You saved me. I'll see to it that you're all greatly rewarded, but, Facade, can you take me home? I'm so tired. I want to go home." Picking her up into his arms, Zelda was asleep and snoring even before he was holding her all the way. The prince then kissed her on the forehead, and Miranda sighed wistfully, but gasped when the completely healed Aghanim picked her up the same way. He also kissed her on the forehead, making her smile and snuggle into him. And while Link was genuinely happy for his friend, he felt a little jealous of Aghanim and Facade as they all started walking away from Spectacle Rock. After all, Facade was carrying Zelda, and Aghanim was carrying Miranda, while Link and Impa were each carrying a Triforce. "Don't despair, young man," Impa said casually as they walked. "Facade and Aghanim may have already found their brides, but I can see that there is still much in store for you, Link. So for now, rest, and celebrate the return of Princess Zelda and both Triforces to their rightful places. Because before you know it, your greatest adventure will be upon you." The end.